I love leveling alts, and I'm betting a lot of you do too. And honestly, I don't care whether it's classic or retail, leveling alts is one of the best parts of the game. And I just like having access to, well, whatever I might need, be it all of the professions or be it a particular gold farm that's only accessible to a certain class. And as a result, I decided that before TBC Plus or TBC Classic or whatever name Blizzard ends up going with arrives, I wanted to have all of the classes, at least all of the classes barring Paladin because I play Horde, at max level. Now, most of the time I don't find this to be a problem because I level mostly through dungeons, and most of the classes that I like to play that I tend to make my main are characters that can heal or can tank, and I don't have a big problem getting into dungeon groups. But just recently I started leveling basically every DPS only class in the game, and this meant that I was going to be reduced to doing a lot more questing. And I'll be honest with you, my knowledge of the quests in Classic is hit and miss. There are zones where I could tell you everything about every quest, and there are zones where I am completely clueless, and I am more than willing to accept that my pathing between zones as I'm leveling is not always the most efficient, and as such, a guide that told me where to go and what to do seemed to be the way to go. Now, any of you that have had a similar train of thought have probably come across guides like Azeroth Autopilot, which, I'll be honest with you, I love in retail, but in Classic it just doesn't seem to work for me. I find it very difficult to use and it's just not all that accurate. And other guides, like I'm familiar with one by Zygor, which apparently is excellent, but I wouldn't know because you have to pay for them. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't pay for a guide like this, especially if it's going to be something that you greatly enjoy, but personally I'm a cheapskate and I am broke, so I didn't want to pay for it. And that led me looking for alternatives, which has led me to finding Busteas. That's how I'm choosing to pronounce this, and it's how I'm going to be pronouncing it going forward, but if that is incorrect then I apologise. But Bustea's leveling guide is the one that I've been using, and I thought that it was worthwhile making a video on it to explain to everybody that there are options out there that you don't have to pay for, and other than the big name one that personally I just find doesn't work. And I thought I'd talk through some of the pros and the cons and whether it's worth your time getting for leveling your alts. So let's dive into it. Now, little disclaimer first, and the first thing you'll notice if you were to go and get this guide and try it for yourself is that in the name of it, it's Horde. Yes, that's right, it's the Bustea's Horde leveling guide, and obviously it goes without saying that means that this guide is Horde only. I do not know if there is an equivalent one for the Alliance. Personally, I haven't found one, but given that this is written by somebody who's obviously got extensive knowledge on the subject, I would imagine that person's got that extensive knowledge playing Horde. People don't generally have that knowledge for both, so I'm afraid this is going to be for you Hordies only. Now, the next thing that you're going to notice is that it works basically just like a checklist, and personally I really like this style that we have for this type of guide, and it not only allows you to know what you're doing and why and how to do it, but also what's coming up. And I really like that because it gives you a few little things that you can do that you can't do with other add-ons. So for example, it was recommending to me that I were to do a quest that has a starter that is a rare drop from a rare mob, and I didn't want to spend an eternity farming this mob. So I was able to simply look ahead, see if it was an essential part of the process I was going to be taking, which it wasn't, and then just simply click the completion or the little tick box that was next to that item on the add-on, and it would classify it as completed. Now, that was excellent for me because it basically just meant I could skip right over that, whereas in other add-ons that often have these functionalities, it's not always easy to see if something is skippable or whether it's essential that you do it for the plan further down the route because it doesn't show you the plan, or also not actually just being that easy to skip in the first place. A lot of these add-ons, you have to type in keyboard commands and things to get them to skip a step because they don't want you to do it, which means if you ever get yourself into a position where you don't want to do something, you're pretty much forced into it or abandoning your guide. So that's something that I really like. Next up, is going to be the actual wording of the steps themselves. Now, a lot of these steps are going to be quite complicated, and, well, quests in Classic, we all know how they work, where something seems quite convoluted, and if you don't read a guide, you're not going to know what you're going to do. Well, in this, it includes all of the little fiddly steps. So if you need to get a gem out of a chest on the 3rd story of a tower on the other side of the map, it's going to take you there and it's going to tell you exactly what you're doing and why. Now, this is fantastic because obviously it goes without saying that a lot of the times you're going to see that you need a quest item, you're going to be looking in your bag, you don't have it, you don't know where to go, and your guide simply says use quest item here, and that's far from ideal. The next thing I wanted to mention is the fact that it is somewhat automated. Vast majority of things that you complete will automatically check themselves off on the checklist to be done. So let's say, for example, there's an objective to hand in a quest. You go hand in that quest, you don't need to tick it, it knows, it's done it for you. Now, that is a reasonably common feature in guides of these types, these add-ons. However, what I would say is that on this add-on, it just simply works better than a lot of the ones that I've experienced. I don't know how they're going about doing the tracking, but whatever they're doing, it works. I know it can be difficult to do in Classic because of restrictions, and as a result, it's not 100%, but it is quite effective. And the best thing is, like I said, because it's a checklist, if it doesn't track something and you have done it, for example, I was told to go gather a flight path. I clicked the flight path and it didn't take it off the list. It was still saying that was the next thing I had to do. Just tick the box and you're done. You moved on. Now, I know these sound like stupid little fiddly things that don't really matter, but when you're following these guides for such a long time, it's so much of a quality of life improvement to have them do that auto tracking. It is, without a doubt, the main reason that I like this add-on so much. Now, that's going to do most of our pros. This is obviously a relatively simple add-on in terms of what it does for you, so there isn't too much in detail to go into for the pros. However, the cons are numerous, and some of them are potentially quite severe, so I thought it's only fair that we cover those as well. Now, the first con that I want to mention is the fact that this guide is going to be fully functional and work as intended if you follow it from the very first step. You make your character and you follow this guide, it works fantastically well. If you don't follow the guide, you are going to be in a position whereby you are going to have to think on your feet to adapt. Now, what do I mean by that? So let's say, for example, you've been following the guide from level 1 to, let's say, level 15, and then you get invited to a dungeon. Now, when you come out of that dungeon, you're going to be a couple of levels ahead of where the guide thinks you're going to need to be, and it doesn't really accommodate for the fact that you're now leveled up more than you should be. So you're going to have to use your own interpretation to skip some stages or simply just do quests that are a little bit below you, which I suppose depending on your class is potentially going to benefit you. But it is something to bear in mind. It's not the end of the world. On the footage you're watching right here, on my warlog, I'm doing quests designed for roughly level 15 and I am closer to 20. So I am pretty much pushing the limits of what you can still do and get experience for. If I were any further leveled ahead, then I would probably have some problems. Now, there are quite a few stages in this, at least that I found in the early stages, where there are sections that simply say grind to a certain point. So obviously if you get ahead and then you just do the quests up till you get to that point, you will either find yourself caught back up to where you should be or not have to do as much grinding as somebody who was further behind. So not that big of an issue, but worth a mention. Now, one thing that I would say is that that's the case in that scenario. However, if you have, let's say for example, a character that is already fairly developed, when you find this add-on and first start using it, that's a different issue entirely. Now, I have a rogue that is level 44 that has never followed this guide, and it has sections built into the guide for exactly this scenario. Now, unfortunately, these sections are level bracketed and I'm somewhat in the middle of a bracket, and it's wanting me to go back and do quests in the early 40s that would already be inefficient for me because I'm a bit higher, but also I've already long since done them and not in an efficient manner that works in regards to this guide. Now, the problem is that this guide is not calculating itself, it is simply a pre-written order of events that need to occur. So as much as you can click off certain steps that you've done. So if you've done step 1, step 5 and step 12, you can click them off and say that you've done them. It's still just going to tell you to do 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth. Now, the problem that you have is that this guide is efficient if you're doing all of the steps, but sometimes if you've done step 2, it's not worth doing step 3 because it's not worth going back for, if you understand what I'm getting at. So I've generally found that if a character is already quite a long way along the process, I don't find the guide anywhere near as helpful as I would starting afresh. Now that is obviously my fault because I didn't bother to look for a leveling guide before I started the process, but it is worth mentioning that that is, in my opinion, quite a big problem that you have. But if you were to spend a little bit of time tracking what you've done and clicking through all of the guide, I'm sure you'll be able to get back on course, but that would be quite tedious and fiddly, so do bear that in mind. And the final negative that I do want to stress, this is very nitpicky and not a big problem at all, but it is just something that I wanted to mention, is that if you are leveling up multiple characters, there aren't really alternatives that you can use in terms of your route and your pathing. Now, this is not a problem of the people who make the guide. They don't expect everybody to be leveling 6 alts at once, and obviously if it gets boring doing the same zones over and over again, then that's because you're leveling too many characters for the same zones at the same time. Probably say that you're better off spacing your characters out in levels so you don't have that problem, or of course you just simply don't level that many characters at once. Now, one other thing that I would like to stress on why this isn't the problem of the people who make the add-on is that in Classic there isn't really very many efficient routes to follow. Now of course there's some variance and some choice, but for the most part people tend to follow the main route with the odd little branch off here and there, and that is what this guide is. It's meant to be an efficiency guide. It doesn't have alternative branching off here routes, because if it did, you may as well just do it for yourself based off what you think is the right thing to do. Now that, like I say, is a problem that shouldn't really exist, and it is definitely not the problem of the developers of this add-on, and not one that I even really like to mention, because quite frankly, if you're not someone who's leveling up every class at the same time through all the same zones, it's a non-issue. But I did want to be quite all-encompassing of my opinions on this add-on, so I thought I'd leave that here. But in conclusion, I absolutely love this add-on. Now, it does have its problems, and I'll be honest with you, I have absolutely zero intent of using it on my rogue that's already beyond the point where I think this guide is going to make it helpful. I think it's just going to be tedious getting it to a point where the guide's able to help me from here. Maybe I'm wrong, and if I am, then you find out by using this add-on that I am. Please do let me know down in the comment section below that I'm an idiot and there's an easy way to adapt, or that it's worth the time just going through and ticking off the things that I've already done. But if you are leveling a character that is already following this guide, or you're starting a fresh one, or it's not that developed already, then this guide is 100% the way to go. It is fantastic. Now, there are the odd little issue where something isn't quite where it says it is because it's a patrolling quest giver or something, for example, and you do have to look and use a bit of your own initiative, but those are so few and far between that it isn't even really worth mentioning. Especially if you contrast it to the other guides out there where this was actually a very common problem, one that I had with Azeroth Autopilot quite frequently in fact, and was one of the main reasons why I gave up on using it. So every character that I am leveling, save for my rogue, is going to be following this guide. I find it very helpful, very efficient, and it just reduces the amount of brain power that you need to invest in terms of what you're doing, so you can focus on the mechanics of playing your class, or maybe even just enjoy Netflix on the side. So that's going to about do it for me today, guys. I do hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do let me know down below if there's anything else that you'd like me to expand upon or talk about or make a video on. Let me know that down there as well. But for now, guys, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Later.